Alright, everyone. This will be the last free chapter of The Nightmare Throne to be posted on this podcast. Chapter 7 marks the end of Part 1, but not the end of the entire book. If you would like to hear the remaining 32 chapters, keep listening at the end for information on how to acquire the full audiobook. Chapter 7: The Cost. Cassia screamed.
Elle? Oh gods! Elle!
She could only stare in horror as the girl straddled Velt's lifeless body. Again and again she tore strips away with her teeth. And once, Cassia thought she saw the girl swallow.
Elle, can you hear me?
Cassia sat up, slowly, not wanting to startle this. Cassia didn't even know what this was.
It's me, Elle. Your sister.
But the girl didn't look up. Too engrossed in finishing what, exactly? For the most part, she didn't seem to be eating Velt. Most bites she spat back onto the floor as blood spilled from her mouth. Most, but not all.
He's dead, Elle. You don't need to... Elle, stop it!
The girl's head jerked up, as if seeing Cassia for the first time. It was a quick motion, more like a bird's than anything human. And when their eyes met, it was like looking into the eyes of a stranger, as if everything they'd shared was gone. Cassia froze, uncertain what to do. She desperately wanted to believe something of her sister remained inside this girl. But those eyes, they regarded her with suspicion, as though she were a threat. With a sudden chill, Cassia backed away.
It's all right, Elle. I'm not your enemy. It's me, Cassia. You remember, don't you?
A picture flashed through her mind of that bloodied mouth curling into a snarl, screaming the same way she'd screamed at Velt. What then? If Illyriel pounced, she'd have little chance of fighting back, not against the speed and strength of a feral ascendant. Unless... Cassia wondered what might happen if she tried again to possess Illyriel. With the bindings in place, would it be as simple as reaching out with her mind? Taking control of a willing sister was one thing, but now, this thing might not want her control. Illyriel, fortunately, didn't attack. She watched Cassia back away before ignoring her again. As she lowered her face to Velt's, hovering a moment, with lips slightly parted, it was almost like returning her attention to a lover. The bite that followed, however, was anything but playful. Cassia's heart was hammering. For the moment she was safe, but for how long? She was only dimly aware she was still crawling backward. And when she hit a statue and could go no further, she pressed her back against the stone as if trying to disappear. Her chest was heaving, but only partially from fear. How could she possibly live with this? She'd only gone along with her father's plan, with its insane risks, because it had been the only way to survive. For Illyriel to survive. Now, it might have been better to have died along with her. Just thinking this made Cassia feel worse. Here, Her sister had made this noble sacrifice, and Cassia couldn't muster the decency to be grateful, to recognize the girl had made her choice, wanting Cassia to live. But had Illyriel known what she was offering? Cassia had imagined quite a different outcome, one in which Illyriel might have simply burned out, that she'd become catatonic like some lifeless puppet. That would have been horrible enough, and yet easier than this. Illyriel's body would have served as a painful reminder of everything they'd lost, but Cassia could have accepted the fact that her sister was gone. She'd have closure, knowing Illyriel was dead and had only left her body as a tragic parting gift. This, however, Cassia couldn't look at this girl and determine with any certainty Illyriel was gone. She found herself torn between desires, one that selfishly hoped some part of her remained, and a conflicting despondency that wanted nothing more than for Illyriel to be spared this fate. As Cassia studied her, covered in blood, she wondered if some part of Illyriel was horrified by her actions, if some hidden recess of her mind was frightened of what she'd become. It was this, more than anything, that prevented Cassia from attempting to possess her. She wanted to, if only to know she could do it, so she wouldn't have to worry when the sudden, desperate need arose to stop Illyriel from doing something, well, something even more horrible than this. But if Illyriel was already lost and confused, wouldn't it be worse to have her mind invaded by another?
Illyriel?
Said Cassia hesitantly.
I know you can hear me. I know your ears are sensitive enough. I know my voice can reach you from here.
The girl didn't look up, which by itself meant nothing. It was much like talking to an animal, with no greater reason than getting it comfortable with your voice. At the same time, Cassia hoped it was more. That, in the same fashion as people in a coma, who couldn't respond despite sometimes being able to hear, Illyriel might be listening. Deep down, Cassia's words might be reaching her.
You don't have to respond. Just listen. And even if you're not in there anymore, or too broken to make sense of words or meanings.
She paused, feeling her throat constrict.
You know what?
She said through stifled sobs.
I'm gonna talk anyway, if only to get myself through this. Call me crazy, but I don't know what else to do. Right now, I have to believe I still have you with me. A part of you, at least. That I'm not sitting alone in the middle of God's nowhere. I can't do this by myself. I just can't.
The girl, as before, made no response. There wasn't, however, much remaining of Velt's face.
I'm gonna stand up, so whatever you do, don't be startled. I'm not gonna hurt you. But I can't just sit here, you know? You and I need to figure this out. So we might as well start.
Using the statue for support, Cassia rose to her feet. The girl looked up with renewed suspicion. It appeared, after all this talking, nothing had changed.
It's all right, It's me, remember? You wouldn't eat your sister, would you?
Illyriel regarded her with an icy glare.
I'm just standing up. No need to be frightened. I can stay here if you want. Just making certain you won't attack or anything.
Cassia's heart hammered. It was hard to tell if she was taking the correct approach. At the same time, if this wasn't going to work, if the creature were beyond all reason, she'd rather learn this now. A few seconds later, Illyriel turned away. By then, she'd lost all interest in Velt, and, instead, eyed the other corners of the cavern. Her eyes lingered on Marion's corpse, as though recognizing what she was. A moment later, she paused on Chisandril, who still hadn't woken up.
Don't even think about it,
said Cassia. She had no idea what had happened to Marion's daughter, if the young girl was sleeping, or if her connection with her mother had left her broken as well. One more casualty to this God's forsaken day. Illyriel crawled on her hands and feet. As she turned, Cassia saw the handle protruding from her leg. Somehow, she'd forgotten the knife was still there. Her sister was bleeding out, and no one was doing anything about it.
You shouldn't move. Just wait and we can...
Illyriel spun to face her, eyes furious. Cassia, without thinking, had taken 2 steps from the statue.
Sorry, but that knife...
The girl hissed, bloodied teeth stretching wide to produce a rough, guttural screech. Cassia flinched, dismayed to be the target of such overwhelming fury. But this was her sister, damn it, and she was all the more determined to not back down. Some wild animals were encouraged by fear. Sometimes the only way was to use a firm hand and let them know. With no further warning, Illyriel sprang forward, giving life to the nightmare Cassia hoped to avoid. The knife did nothing to slow her down, and as she flew through the air, teeth bared and fingers stretched like claws, she lost all resemblance to the sister she knew.
Elle, don't!
The room shifted. Pain flashed through her leg, inciting thoughts of,
Bloody heavens, she's tearing me apart, just like...
But that wasn't it. No fingers were grasping Cassia. Nothing dragged her or tossed her around. There was nothing on top of Cassia at all. When she looked down, Velt's knife was stuck in her leg. The pain was so excruciating, her mind couldn't make sense of it. Until she realized it wasn't her leg, but Illyriel's. Somehow, without the conscious decision, she'd successfully transferred to her sister's body.
Damn it!
She yelled, and was surprised to hear her sister's voice. She should have expected this, but it still felt wrong. Horribly wrong. The familiarity of that voice was supposed to be comforting. It should have been proof they were still together and could talk this out as they always had.
Elle,
She moaned.
I'm sorry.
For all she knew, she was still talking to herself. Either way, what was done, and she might as well do some good while she was here. Sitting back, Cassia curled one leg underneath her, while slowly and carefully stretching the other in front. Looking at the blade made the pain feel worse. Her entire leg was on fire, throbbing to the beat of her heart. But somehow, Casey managed not to pass out. No doubt she would have done just that, were it not for ascendancy. A small blessing, that. Beside her on the floor was her spear from earlier. Steeling herself, she jammed the wooden shaft into her mouth while clutching onto the knife handle with the other. Biting down hard, she nearly yanked it out before she stopped herself. What the hell was she doing? Casey looked around, trying to find something to tie around her leg. While she knew ascendancy would aid the healing process, this was no reason to test its limits. She needed to be smart. She needed to be careful. Her leg, however, seemed to disagree. It throbbed with renewed ferocity, as if to say, "To hell with being careful! Get this damn thing out!" She tried to ignore this and groaned, realizing her best bet was to scoot back to the circle's center. Taking care to immobilize the injured leg, she did all the work with the other. Even the slightest movement, however, sent waves of agony through her body. Reaching Velt's corpse took longer than expected, but she needed his belt. Unfortunately, this required her to look at his remains, and this time from much closer up. Even before reaching him, she was overwhelmed by the stench, made all the more acute by her enhanced senses. Its coppery tang was so overpowering, she could almost taste it. And she realized she did taste it. Until that moment, she'd been so focused on her leg and the shock of being attacked, she hadn't noticed what was in her mouth. The thought of Velt's blood nearly caused her to gag, but she couldn't let revulsion stop her now. She'd come this far. She would relieve her sister from this damned blade. As Cassia scooted the final distance, she felt lightheaded. She ignored the discarded flesh that surrounded her. Her finger pried at the metal buckle, slippery with blood. She let her mind turn off, forcing her hands through the motions, just wanting this to end. Before she knew it, the belt was cinched around her leg. She couldn't remember what she'd done with her spear, but she no longer cared to have anything between her teeth. Taking a firm grip of the knife's handle, she pulled with all her strength. And less than a second later, lost all consciousness. When her senses returned, she was back in her own body. Lying on her back, she opened her eyes to stalactites overhead, dim in the light of the waning fires. Strangely enough, she felt a residual pain in her leg, despite knowing this shouldn't have been possible. It seemed to reaffirm the reality of the experience. The trauma had indeed been hers, despite the body belonging to someone else. She forced herself to sit up. How long was she unconscious? In sudden panic, she feared Illyriel had woken up, that she was gone and wandering by herself. But when she turned to the spot where she'd left her sister, the girl was still there. She was even more relieved to see the knife discarded to one side. That was good. Her memories were distant and hazy near the end, and she hadn't been certain she'd finished the job. Her sister wasn't moving. Her body stretched out, no doubt needing time to recover. Her head had fallen back, making a pillow of Velt's mutilated. Well, the specifics weren't important. For a brief instant, Cassia wondered if her sister might be dead, that she'd been expelled from her mind due to excessive blood loss. But she needn't have worried. After a moment's focus, she could indeed discern the rise and fall of her sister's bloodied chest.
I'm sorry, Elle.
And then she nearly laughed, for right then she knew her sister couldn't possibly be listening. The girl was knocked out and completely oblivious. But Cassia hadn't spoken for her sister's benefit, had she? More than anything, the apology was for Cassia, so she could hear the words. She was sorry. Not just for this, but for everything.
Now, let's have a look at that wound.
Her mind found solace in having something to do, that despite not knowing what the future held in store, nothing was confusing about this present urgency. The first step, however, was surprisingly difficult. She kept remembering the crazed look in Illyriel's eyes, wild with rage and uncontrollable hatred. Cassia wasn't sure she could face that right now. Of course, there was another way. It'd be easier to inhabit Illyriel's body from the start. She could wrap the wound herself without fear of the girl waking up. But Cassia didn't like that idea either, and she wasn't entirely sure why. In small part, it was because Illyriel needed her rest and shouldn't move around, regardless of who did the moving. But there was more to it than that. Cassia felt a need, deep down, to come to terms with these developments. She couldn't keep avoiding her sister forever. After all, if she asserted control every time she was afraid, she'd never stop. No matter how she looked at it, controlling Illyriel didn't solve the problem, but only put it off until later. And since giving up was out of the question, she'd need to face these fears sooner or later.
Please,
She said.
dear gods, stay asleep.
In the end, she didn't have to move Illyriel's body all that much, and the girl didn't wake. As she peeled aside Illyriel's previously white slip, Cassia was surprised to find the skin already knit together. It was red and tender, not fully healed, but enough that a bandage was no longer necessary. The only thing left was to remove the belt. With that done, she gave her sister some space to drift freely among her bizarre, crazed dreams. Cassia herself was surprised she'd been able to stay awake this long, unable to believe how horribly dragged out this night had been. Sleep, however, came with its own set of problems. It wasn't that she had trouble letting her guard down. Cassia knew she could be safe by closing herself and Chisandrel away into the storeroom. Though the door wouldn't stop Illyriel for long, it'd provide enough warning for Cassia to wake up. No, what bothered her was the idea of Illyriel wandering off. Just the thought of the girl being ambushed by monsters, or, gods forbid, coming into contact with other people. How could Cassia possibly sleep and allow that to happen? Ultimately, she supposed there might not be a solution. Perhaps this was one of those risks she'd have to live with, as she certainly couldn't stay awake for the rest of her life. She bent over to Sandral's body, and the young girl stirred. Cassia might have felt glad, were she not on the brink of exhaustion. The girl's lips parted.
What?
Shh, said Cassia.
We're safe for now. Just sleep.
The girl didn't argue, and luckily she wasn't all that difficult to carry. Upon reaching the room and finding a second long coil of rope on the floor, Cassia formed an idea. Laying the girl on the ground, Cassia snatched up the rope and returned to her sister. Forming a loop, she fastened one end to her sister's ankle. The purpose wasn't to hold her sister here, as she didn't imagine anything would trap Illyrio for long. For this same reason, she didn't tie the other end to a stone statue or anything that might seem sturdy. Instead, she attached it to her own leg.
Don't let the light go out,
said Cassandra when she re-entered the storeroom. Cassia groaned, forcing herself to add more firewood to the nearest sconce. Then she closed the door, running the rope underneath. She didn't have the strength even to cry herself to sleep. The rope lurched, pulling Cassia from her dreams and sliding across the floor. In near darkness, she quickly reoriented herself, with less than a few seconds to catch her heels against the door. The rope dug into her foot, twisting her ankle so hard she thought it might break. Then, just as suddenly, the rope went slack. She heard a faint smack, followed by a growl. Cassia didn't think the rope snapped so much as it had fouled her sister's footing. Illyrio might be strong, but she wasn't that heavy.
Oh!
She shouted, hoping to get her attention before the pulling recommenced. There was a moment of silence before Illyrio hissed.
That's right. Over here.
Hearing the sounds of approach, she pulled some slack on the rope, rose to her feet, and backed away. She hadn't fully straightened before Illyrio was at the door, pressing her face against the bars. Cassia thought the girl might pound on the wood, throwing herself against the door to break it down, or that she'd stretch a groping arm through the window mindlessly. For the moment, however, Illyrio simply regarded her with eyes stretched a bit too wide. Cassia decided to try something different. While Illyrio was possibly incapable of reason and wouldn't respond to social cues, who could say for sure? Cassia would rather believe there remained a shred of humanity inside the girl, and the last thing she wanted was to drive that away through anger and threats.
Good morning, Illyrio,
she said in as bright a voice as she could muster, which admittedly was more tired than anything. Through the bars, the girl's jaw clenched visibly, working her lips as though preparing a snarl.
How's your leg?
Cassia lowered her hands to her own leg to help her understand. She wasn't worried Illyrio wouldn't see. Though Cassia's eyes had trouble in this darkness, Illyrio's wouldn't. The girl's gaze broke away, becoming distracted by the bars in front of her, almost as though trying to understand what they were or what held them together, perhaps wondering how to remove this obstacle.
Well, you look much better, so that's a relief. I'm also glad to see you acting calmer. You haven't broken the door. That's good.
She half expected the girl to attack the door in earnest, just to prove her wrong. But Illyriel didn't. For the moment, anyway.
Why don't we start over? It seems you don't remember me, but that's okay. I don't mind introducing myself. My name's Cassia,
she said, while motioning to herself with one hand.
Cassia. Understand? I'm your sister.
When she disappeared from the window, Cassia groaned in frustration.
Oh, I wasn't finished.
She considered herself lucky, however, her sister stayed as long as she had.
Illyriel, what are you?
With a hint of suspicion, she walked to the window and saw Illyriel facing her from the center of the circle. Reaching down, her sister took hold of the rope, the same rope still attached to Cassia's leg. Had the girl noticed this? Had she perhaps been looking past the bars?
You wouldn't dare.
Illyriel's face was expressionless, and for a brief instant, their eyes made contact. Then the girl twisted, preparing a ferocious pull. She didn't finish the motion before Cassia took control. From the middle of the room, Cassia looked up from her hands, now the ones holding the rope, and heard a loud thunk opposite the door.
Damn it!
She hissed, knowing the sound had come from her own body crumpling against the wood. That thunk had been much louder than she would have liked, and would probably leave a bruise. A few bumps, however, were nothing compared to what had almost happened to her leg. Considering Illyriel's strength, it wasn't difficult to imagine the door breaking into pieces. Worst of all was the thought she would have actually done it. Illyriel didn't care what became of Cassia. She clenched her teeth, determined not to cry. Letting the rope drop, she took a look around. With the fires so close to burning out, the enormous cavern had become indistinct and devoid of color. But she could see nonetheless. She could make perfect sense of where she was, along with everything around her, largely due to the embers that remained. It must have been similar to the vision of cats prowling through the night through darkened alleys. But without those embers, she wasn't confident Illyriel's senses would be enough. The abyssal current had a mind of its own, as if making a conscious effort to drown the world in darkness. Cassia would need time to experiment later and test her limits. She wanted to explore, knowing how important it was she get used to this place, this realm, and the creatures that lived here. But even that would have to wait, while she dealt with matters far more pressing, namely her sister. Walking forward, Cassia took note of how the leg was healing. The knife had gone deep, sliding past bone. But the pain had nearly subsided, burning down to little more than a faint throb. She reached the door and opened it, having never locked it in the first place. The indistinct shape of her body spilled through and onto the floor. Leaning down, she lifted her body easily and laid it carefully beside Cassandra. The girl's eyes were open, staring at the ceiling.
Chess?
She asked in surprise. A soft moan escaped the girl's lips, and with only her head, she turned in the opposite direction. Cassia couldn't imagine what Cassandra was going through. It seemed unlikely the girl understood much of what happened. It was impossible to tell if she even remembered her mother's death. Cassandra didn't respond to Cassia's questions, displaying a complete lack of emotion. She didn't even seem bothered by the fires going out. All of this left Cassia feeling helpless, presenting a problem she could do nothing about. Ultimately, the best thing might be to give the girl some time. After that, if she didn't show improvement, Cassia could think of something else. For now, she untied the rope from her own sleeping body before leaving the room. She added more wood to the nearest fire, shut the door, and returned Illyriel to where she'd been standing. She then released control. In that same instant, Illyriel screeched. Ignoring the flash of pain across her forehead, Cassia scrambled to her feet and returned to the window. She couldn't tell what Illyriel might be thinking, or what her sister might remember from the last few minutes. Had her mind skipped from one moment to the next, wondering how she'd lost hold of the rope? Or was her rage prompted because she had seen it all, and she'd watched her own hands open the door and untie the rope? Illyriel turned and met her eyes again. Teeth bared, she spat in her direction. So forcefully, at this distance, Cassia felt the spray.
Now calm down,
She said, swallowing in frustration.
We wouldn't have this problem if you'd just...
Faster than her eyes could see, the girl reached down and yanked on the rope. The motion was so unlike her first attempt, it was as though she was hoping for the element of surprise, to finish the action before Cassia could stop her. The rope, no longer tied to Cassia's foot, merely snagged beneath the door. It shot into the cavern and landed behind the bewildered girl. Illyriel turned to the rope's free end, then back to the storeroom, clearly confused. So she hadn't seen. Good to know. With renewed determination, she swung its length as though brandishing a whip. Cassia jumped back as it smacked the door, faster than Cassia could cover her ears. The reverberation lifted a layer of dust.
Stop it, Elle! Do you hear?
The rope struck the door a second time. A third. There was a resounding crack as the wood split apart. Cassandra didn't so much as flinch, oblivious to the ruckus. Cassia groaned, realizing she couldn't allow this to go on. She couldn't bear the thought of losing that door. This time, she lowered herself to the ground before taking control. Illyriel must have been mid-swing because, in the next moment, she felt the rope slip from her fingers and go flying across the circle. Her body continued to spin before she caught herself. Cassia took a calming breath and followed the rope to where it had landed. Coiling it together, She hid it behind a statue where Illyriel wouldn't see. She felt flustered by the need to take such measures, but she hadn't anticipated her sister being so impossible. Once again, she returned Illyriel to the cavern's center and released control. The girl cried out in fury.
Don't like that, do you?
Yelled Cassia, directing her voice through the window.
Let me tell you something. I don't appreciate being attacked. Understand?
Cassia didn't expect the girl to comprehend the words, but perhaps should see the correlation between attacking Cassia and its consequences. Sooner or later, she'd realize she only had to stop. There came another crash against the door, likely a rock. Cassia grit her teeth. Retaking control, she found a second rock already clutched in her hand. She tossed it harmlessly to the side, then proceeded to clear the central floor from anything her sister might have a mind to throw. When Cassia re-released her, it took Illyriel a moment to regain her bearings. She was likely caught off guard by seeing her surroundings stripped clean. Shouting in rage, Illyriel threw herself at the door, only for Cassia to return her to the center of the room.
Just stop already.
Cassia groaned, wondering if she might have to do this all day. Illyriel screamed before jumping again. This time, Cassia had to redirect her momentum, targeting the outer frame to spare the wood further damage. Illyriel tried this 2 more times, and was returned twice more to the same spot. Then, finally, to Cassia's bitter surprise, she broke into a wail.
Move. Where?
Cassia paused to listen, wondering if this was just another tactic, an attempt to distract. For the moment, however, the girl had given up. Cassia should have been glad, justified the lesson had finally gotten through. But there was so much confusion in Illyriel's tone, so much anger and despair. It broke her heart.
Bloody heavens, she doesn't understand.
Illyriel was trying, but this somehow made it worse, because in some ways, her sister wasn't entirely broken. Cassia could see that now, how Illyriel demonstrated intelligence in her use of the rope. It was proof she possessed her own flavor of resourcefulness. But Illyriel didn't know that. In her mind, she was trying her hardest not to feel insane. And despite her greatest efforts, the world refused to make sense. Rocks disappearing, her own body changing position without any warning. Cassia was no longer sure she'd done the right thing. She'd needed to prevent the girl from breaking things, but at what cost? She didn't know how long she could see her sister frightened like this, unable to trust even herself.
Elle, how am I supposed to do this?
The girl, of course, made no response. Letting out a sigh, Cassia got up and approached the window. Illyriel still stood at the center of the room, but her bloodied face was streaked with tears. With a look of abject bewilderment, she was searching the room for anything she might have missed. something to explain her present difficulties. Cassia opened the door. The sound turned Illyriel toward her, and for a moment she paused. Her face changed from confusion to something like resentment. Her eyes went wide with mania and fear. Cassia hadn't wanted it to be this way. Her sister wasn't a wild horse that needed to be broken. No matter how far gone or how lost she'd become, she was ultimately still human. Illyriel shrieked as her eyes once again turned cold and hateful.
We've done enough for now.
Faster than she could blink, the girl attacked one last time. But Cassia took control, landed the jump, and simultaneously caught her limp body as it collapsed. Laying it carefully inside, she closed the door.
I'm gonna look around,
She said, in case Chisandrel was listening.
It's nothing to worry about. I'll be back. And I'll bring food.
Then, as an added precaution, she found an enormous slab of rock, larger than herself, at the base of the plateau. With a little effort, she placed it in front of the door. Though it was unlikely more creatures were stalking these caverns, it was better to be safe. She couldn't afford for anything to stumble across her body, vulnerable as she was. She'd made that mistake with Velt already. Cassia took a deep breath and prepared for her first excursion outside. Though she planned to be quick, she hadn't forgotten the monsters above. Treading carefully, she hoped to recover the wagon's supplies without provoking a fight. As an extra benefit, it gave her a break from her sister. It provided time for herself and a chance to think. She attempted the trip with no light at all, with the reasoning she could always go back for an ember should the darkness prove impossible to navigate. In the end, however, her eyes were enough. Her sight range was drastically reduced to a radius of roughly 10 feet, but she could make sense of her immediate surroundings, as though a faint light emanated from her own body. The limitation was worrisome, and she imagined creatures closing around her. But she decided it was for the best. Even a dull ember, after all, would attract attention. With her speed, it was easy to make her way through the caves. And in less than a few minutes, she'd ascended the stone steps leading back into the monastery. She wasn't surprised to find Roke dead, eviscerated by the same beast that had found them below. In the back of her mind, she had already accepted it, and only regretted not throwing the heinous deed into Velt's face. Gods, Velt must have passed through here and seen what his treachery had caused, and yet it had the audacity to call her an abomination? Cassia heard a howl far in the distance. It was a harmonious wail of two separate pitches, one high and one low, a sound from no animal she'd ever encountered. The cry trilled for 3 full seconds before dying off. It was beautiful, haunting, and far enough away she needn't be concerned. Rather than exiting the way they came, she leaped upward to climb through the hole in the ceiling. Strangely, there were no visible indications she was headed outside. From above, there came no light at all, as though the sky was as dark as the caverns below. Near the roof, her handholds became slippery and coated in an increasingly thick layer of, not muck, she realized, blood. Even so, Cassia pushed herself forward. There was no point in cleaning it off, so she might as well get used to it. Pulling herself onto the tiled roof, a faint breeze confirmed she'd made it outside. But, as before, she could only see about 10 feet in front, not even to where the tiles ended. Still, she straightened her back, turned a slow circle, and took in her first real glimpse of the abyssal realm. She struggled to describe how she felt beneath that oppressive, endless sky. There was nothing above but the immensity of space, of the entire universe, a vastness without stars, devoid of light or heat. But it was worse than that, because it wasn't empty. Though she couldn't see them, there were dark planets that roamed above. And there were other things besides. Unknown things, impossible to observe. She felt a chill as the wind picked up. The monastery settled in a chorus of wooden groans. Without seeing the trees, she heard them sway. Cassia had spent years preparing for this moment, imagining what it'd be like. But now that it was here, she only felt sorrow. It wasn't her, after all, trapped in this world. At any moment, Cassia had an exit. When she started to feel overwhelmed, as if the darkness would drown her, it was simply a matter of returning to her body. Not so for her sister. In addition to Illyriel's broken state, with all its confusion and shapeless fears, this was a prison she'd never escape, as if going insane wasn't bad enough. Cassia swallowed hard, realizing that no matter what terrible things Illyriel might do, if it came to broken bones, or even Cassia's death, it'd pale in comparison to what Cassia had done to her. For the second time that day, tears clouded her vision. A vision not of the reality seen by regular people, the illusory landscape touched by sunlight. This darkness was the world as it truly was. The Nightmare Throne by Lynn Clark releases September 27th everywhere books are sold. You can pre-order it right now on Amazon in standard hardcover, paperback, ebook, as well as the audiobook you've already started listening to. The printed version features 50 illustrations produced by the author himself, including chapter headers, full-page artwork, and a double-page map in black and white. Furthermore, from right now until September 27th, a special deluxe full-color edition is available for purchase on Kickstarter. This includes the same 50 illustrations printed in color, as well as a dust jacket, custom end papers, sprayed edges, and alternate artwork printed along the case laminate, featuring both sisters on opposite sides. This version will be signed and numbered by the author in the order of Kickstarter backer number. That way, people who pledge earlier will receive a lower and more collectible number. Just search for The Nightmare Throne by Austen Lynn Clark, or check the show notes of this podcast for the relevant links.